Damn dog. Shut up. Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome back to Super Kaiju Binge, episode 18, I believe. And today we're going to be talking about a very special movie. Because it's one that didn't love it when I first saw it, kind of got in the hate wagon for a bit, and now I watch it and I'm just like, God, this is just such a fun flick. Today, me and good old Trevor boy.
Howdy, everybody. This flick kind of grows on you.
Like a fungus. 1967's King Kong Escapes. Of course, we'll be discussing the American version because Universal are a bunch of dickheads when it comes to King Kong, so this is the only one that's available. But also, apparently, this is the better cut of the movie, so win-win. Yes, indeed. King Kong Escapes, where Kong fights a robotic doppelganger of himself. What an idea. Trev, please tell us your history with this movie. But wait, first, a word from our sponsor. Nope, nothing yet. Go ahead.
So I think the first time I heard of this movie was in those Crestwood House monster books. They had one for King Kong and several Universal monsters. And they did mention King Kong Escapes. They had a picture. It was whenever he's being airlifted onto Doctor Who's boat. And I remember reading the info for that and being intrigued. Of course, then that was like years ago, and there wasn't an available copy of the movie, but eventually it did come out on DVD, I think in 2005, to coincide with Jackson's remake of King Kong.
Because of course, right?
Along with King Kong versus Godzilla. Although, ironically, I never picked those DVDs up. No, I actually saw the movie about 11 or 10 years ago whenever I was buying a bunch of bootlegs. And I was really intent on getting the Japanese version of all these different kaiju movies. So I picked up King Kong Escapes and King Kong versus Godzilla, among many others, because I wanted both cuts. And so that's when I first actually saw the movie. But I do remember it being advertised during a marathon that Sci-Fi Channel used to host. It was called Oh My Godzilla. They had a version early on in 94, and then later on in 97, like a year before 98 came out. And it was always paired with Mothra. So it's actually kind of interesting because me and Nick were talking about it off camera. We were suspecting that the difference in the cuts was kind of like minor edits here and there. And that reminded me, Mothra and King Kong Escapes used to be shown together on the Sci-Fi Channel for a little while. And they actually still have promos on YouTube if you look them up, and they're real nostalgic, and especially if you remember watching them from that time. But yeah, anyway, this was one that I always wished that I had seen earlier, especially when I was a kid. But lo and behold, I actually saw it again like 10 or 11 years ago, and that's whenever I was becoming a true kaiju connoisseur, I guess you'd say. And I've always liked this movie. But over the years, it's kind of grown on me more than initially did. So yeah, there's my history.
So I don't mean to repeat myself a whole lot from my original review of this movie, but so I first heard of King Kong Escapes through James Rolfe when he did his top 10 giant movie monsters video. Of course, King Kong was number 2. Which, now that I think about it, really goes to show his allegiance for Godzilla versus Kong, the fucking traitor. He went through like a brief history of Kong's movies. Of course, he talked about the original, then in King Kong versus Godzilla, and then he said, then in King Kong Escapes, where he fights Robot Kong. I was like, what? That's a movie? So not long after that, my stepdad, he had this book. I can't remember what it was called. It was kind of big. It was like this wide and about this tall, but it was like really thin. It was like a glorified magazine, but it was like a little detailed history on the various different versions of King Kong. I think it was leading up to like it came out in the late 70s because it didn't talk about '05. It talked about the 76 remake and the trilogy of knockoffs, Ape, Queen Kong, and Mighty Peking Man. But the one that always stuck out to me was when it was talking about King Kong Escapes, because they had this poster in it that it was a black and white photo of King Kong grabbing onto Tokyo Tower, and there's explosions and fire and spaceships and people in suits all around him, and he's fighting Mechanicong. And I would just sit there and stare at this freaking poster. I was like, God, this movie looks awesome. And I would just build up this image of King Kong Escapes in my mind as just like this big epic movie. So when I started using Amazon a lot more, specifically when I got no. I was in a really big both Alien and Predator mood and a really big kaiju mood at the time, and I wanted to expand my collection. This also had a lot to do with that year. Okay, I remember it now. It was 2010 because James Rolfe had just done his Camp Colt season for Monster Madness, and episode 11 was when he talked about War of the Gargantuas. So I really wanted to get that movie too. So that Christmas, I decided I wanted to go on Amazon and I wanted to get some movies. I remember 4 out of the ones I got. Well, 5 more specifically. I got Predator 2, Godzilla 2000, the double pack of Rodan and War of the Gargantuas, and also King Kong Escapes. I don't really know which one I was more excited about, but I do believe the first one I watched was Godzilla 2000. But of the non-Godzilla movies, the first one that I watched, I'm pretty sure, was King Kong Escapes. And it actually, now that I really think about it, was not at my mom's place with that pizza that I detailed originally. Well, it involved pizza, but it wasn't at my mom's. It was actually at my grandparents' place when I popped it on, and I was like really, really excited because I was thinking, oh God, this movie looks so awesome. It looks so awesome because, of course, I would look at the front of the DVD, and I was like, God, this movie just looks epic. So I sat down and I'm watching this movie, and for the first 2 acts, I'm just like totally enthralled. I was like, oh my God, this movie is awesome. And, of course, enjoying the Murphy's pizza that I had. But then the third act rolled around. I was like, the one thing I was looking forward to the most is what this movie lets me down on. But still, I did enjoy the movie, and I used to rewatch it quite a bit over the next couple of years. That just kind of, no pun intended, escaped me for a while. But then Adam comes along and does his Ishiro Honda-thon, does an episode on King Kong Escapes, and it kind of made me rediscover the movie. And I went back and I watched it, and I kind of just jumped on a bit of a hate wagon with the movie, just saying, oh, it's bad, it's stupid, it's dumb. But over the years, I've rediscovered it, and I've just, again, and you know what, guys? Fuck all you haters. King Kong Escapes is a fun-ass fucking flick. I don't give a shit what anybody says, and I really don't give a shit that they're trying to cancel Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka Tano. Goddamn, Star Wars fans are so evil.
Say the least.
King Kong Escapes is a fun-ass flick. Perfect? No. This movie's got a lot of problems. But it's a fun fucking movie. So the production history of King Kong Escapes is fairly straightforward. So as discussed with Ebra Horror of the Deep, that was Toho's first attempt to try to make a King Kong movie, because that movie was originally going to be called Operation Robinson Crusoe, King Kong versus Ebra. But then Rankin Bass, who had the King Kong show going at the time, which, again, I have not really seen, though from what I have, the few snippets here and there that I have seen, it looks terrible. So Rankin Bass was not a fan of that script, so that got converted into Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. But then the next year, Rankin Bass decided to give Toho another chance, and Tomiyuki Tanaka decided to pull out all the bullshit, hired Ishiro Honda, hired Takashi Kimura to direct and write. And this was apparently, from what Trev was saying, more of Toho's focus in 1967. Like, Son of Godzilla was the B production, and this was more trying to be the A production, especially since this was a what's a collaboration between American studios with some American money and also American actors. So they're putting a lot more focus and ambition into this movie. So the script was written, and it is much more faithful to the original formula of the King Kong show, because it actually does draw elements from the show. And I don't know if this is true, but from what Adam says, a lot of stuff he says you can take with a grain of salt. But I guess they were trying to make a King Kong franchise with this, but I guess it just wasn't a big hit. So those plans were scrapped. But over the years, of course, this movie has garnered a massive cult following, which it really does deserve.
I wouldn't say they were trying to do a franchise. They had the license for a certain amount of time. They wanted to do the Robinson Crusoe movie, but Rankin Bass said no. And so then they did this because it was more in line with the cartoon. But, if it had been successful, yeah, maybe. And they probably could have renewed the license. But I don't think it bombed by any means, but it wasn't like a massive hit. 1967 was actually the year where not only did every major studio in Japan have a kaiju movie, that was also where the genre started to dip. And it reached the peak of its popularity in movies, at least.
That is very true. Yeah, so 1967 was indeed the year that every single major studio released a monster movie. With Toho, you had King Kong Escapes and Son of Godzilla. With Dai, you had Gamera versus Gauss. With Nikatsu, you had Gap of the Triphibian Monster. I don't know what studio did this, but the original Yongari Monster from the Deep also came out. And also Shochiku released The X from Outer Space this year.
Well, for one thing, Yongari was a South Korean movie too, but it's still following along in that same vein of popularity.
Exactly, yeah. So you could say this was this got lost in the crowd with a crowded year.
Probably. That's what I would say.
But I think it made decent money. It made $3 million in U.S. and Canada, and it sold 1 million tickets in France. So I think this movie did have some kind of success, but I don't know how. And there's the word.
Yeah, it had some kind of impact, because here's a funny story. I have a bootleg of Toho's release of Final Wars, and I forgot who they were interviewing. It's an American guy. I don't know if it was Keith Emerson who did the score, or it was somebody who has like a reputation as a Godzilla collector, and some people from Toho were in his house interviewing him, and he had like this really neat bachelor pad kind of thing going on. And the Toho people asked him, okay, so what's your favorite Godzilla movie? And the funny thing is that he actually didn't mention a Godzilla movie. He asked them, what was the one with the robot Kong? And there was kind of like this little pause for a moment, and then they told him, well, that was King Kong Escapes. And he said, yeah, I like that one. And I was thinking, well, way to fail a Godzilla-related question. You actually say a King Kong answer, but I digress. That's just something I found funny.
And as far as this movie's legacy goes, Toho wanted to use King Kong again after this movie, and because he was set to be included in an early draft for Destroy All Monsters, but was dropped due to the fact that Toho's license with Kong was set to expire. But Toho managed to get some use out of this movie's suit, It was reused to play the character Gorilla in episode 38 of the Toho superhero show Go Green Man. And Toho would bring the character Gorosaurus, of course, into the Godzilla series. And the same suit was reused to portray Gorosaurus in Go Godman, which was another Toho superhero show. And in the early 90s, of course, Toho wanted to do a remake of Godzilla vs. King Kong, and then they wanted to do Godzilla vs. Mechanicong, which really fucking sucks. I really would love to see that movie. But for both cases, obtaining permission to use the likeness of King Kong would have been difficult because, again, Universal are just a bunch of dickheads when it comes to King Kong. So this movie certainly does have a legacy, which, again, it also deserves.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, we're talking about King Kong here, and if you make a robot version of him, that's going to be something that stands out in the history of the character.
Yeah, and undoubtedly, Mechanicong, of course, had influence in the creation of Mecha Godzilla. So again, like with Kong and Godzilla, Mechanicong and Mecha Godzilla will always be connected. So, the plot of King Kong Escapes is actually very straightforward. An evil genius named Doctor Who, played by Eize Yamamoto, I think, or Hideo Yamamoto, voiced in the American version by fucking Paul Frees, a.k.a. Burgermeister Meisterburger from Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Toys? I hate toys. And toys hate me. Either they are going or I am going. And I am certainly not going. Doctor Who creates Mechanicong, a robot version of King Kong, to dig for the highly radioactive element X, found only at the North Pole. Mechanicong enters an ice cave and begins to dig into a glacier, but the radiation destroys its brain circuits and causes the robot to shut down. Who then sets his sights on getting the real King Kong to finish the job. Who is taken to task by a female overseer named Madame Piranha, though I guess in the American cut she's named Madame X, so I'll just call her that, whose country's government is financing the doctor's schemes and frequently berates him for his failure to get results. Meanwhile, a submarine commanded by Mr. Carl Nelson, suspiciously named after the villain from Mothra, arrives at Mondo Island. This is not in continuity with the rest of the Showa Toho series. This movie is very standalone, though it begs for a sequel, in my opinion. Where the legend...
Well, pretty much everything with Godzilla had a continuity, but everything else kind of did its own thing, I believe.
Where the legendary King Kong lives. Here, the giant ape gets to an intense fight with a giant dinosaur, Gorosaurus, of course, this being his debut appearance, and also a sea serpent, all being homages to the original 1933 film. Hang on one sec. Okay. He, of course, is smitten by Lieutenant Susan Watson, played by Linda Miller, and dubbed terribly, following in the footsteps of Ann Darrow from the 1933 film. Doctor Who subsequently goes to Mondo Island and abducts Kong and brings him back to his base at the North Pole. Kong is hypnotized by a flashing light device and fitted with a radio earpiece. Who commands Kong to retrieve Element X from the cave. However, problems with the earpiece ensue, and Who has to kidnap Susan Watson, of course, being the only person who can control Kong. After Watson and her fellow officers are kidnapped by Doctor Who, Madame X unsuccessfully tries to seduce Nelson to bring him over to her side. Eventually, God, horny bitch. Eventually, Kong escapes and swims all the way to Japan, where the climactic battle with Mechanicong ensues. They face off at Tokyo Tower, and then Kong prevails and destroys Mechani-Kong. And then after this, the next morning, runs off and kills Doctor Who and destroys his crew. Kong triumphantly swims home back to his island paradise, thus ending the movie. Trev?
Pretty straightforward, but it's a good time. -1 point, which I will mention for my cons, but yeah, I'll wait for that.
My thoughts on this movie story, yeah, it's a very good, well, not a great, it's a good adaptation of the King Kong show. Of course, it features Doctor Who and his evil organization wanting to take over. It's got a fun, campy, light tone, despite who wrote it. And of course, the inclusion of Mechani-Kong is awesome. It's just a fun movie. I like the movie story. It's nothing too special. And it also manages to very well still feel like a classic 60s Toho movie and also like a pseudo remake of the original King Kong.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
That's all I have to say. So, your pros and cons, Trevor boy. How many you got?
Probably off the top of my head, I'm going to say 4, maybe 5, but we'll see where we're going with that.
I have 9.
9?
Yeah.
Okay, well that should be fun. Okay, so pro number 1 for me is Kong himself. I actually think that in terms of Toho's 2 movies adapting him, this is probably the better of the 2.
Wait, I have 10 pros.
10 pros. Well, there we go. Yeah, I just like Kong in this movie. I think even though the suit is still pretty derpy looking, I think he looks better than he did. He doesn't look like a... Huh?
I was sniggering to myself because the derpy look.
Well,
God fucking damn, Kong looks like the abominable snow monster from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in this movie.
Also Rankin Bass.
Which also is Rankin Bass, yes.
Yes, indeed. No, at least he doesn't look like an orangutan on meth in this movie. So there's
to say the least.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely going to get into this with probably my number 1 con is that, well, I'll just go ahead and say it. The effects in the movie are kind of inconsistent, and that includes Kong and his suit. But overall, I like his dimensions better. How his arms are kind of slouched, and he, drags his arms a little bit. His proportions are, I guess, less humanoid and more actual gorilla, but he still really looks like the original stop-motion puppet to a degree.
We'll get to that when we get to the effects.
Yeah. No, I just like him in this movie, and I also like how the scene where he's captured by Doctor Who and his cronies, they had to have watched this whenever they were looking for inspiration for Kong Skull Island, because even though it's a bunch of Vietnam choppers and whatnot, like whenever the choppers in that movie take off from the boat and go into the storm, of course, Mondo Island doesn't have a storm, so they just fly right in. But it's very, very reminiscent of that moment in Skull Island. And also you could say, well, like whenever they're dropping the bombs to, knock them out, the main thing I was thinking of, you don't go dropping bombs in somebody's home unless you're looking for a fight, which is, from Skull Island. That's what I thought immediately. So, yeah, Kong's great in this movie, minus a little derpy moment or two. And I think that's a good thing because it is a movie about him. So, yeah. Pro number 2, I would say, is Doctor Who. Probably one of the most memorable villains, if not the most memorable, unless you're talking about an alien invader in a Toho movie. Love the way Paul Frees dubs him. Hideo also doesn't have a bad villainous voice, just very slimy and kind of sneery. If you actually
this is not Hideo's best villain performance, because I still say that's Dr. Shiragami from the original Kamen Rider show. But this may be his most, not even his most memorable either. This is most classic villain role, I'll say.
yes, for sure. And certainly memorable for people who, are fond of this movie, as we are. Just a very interesting concept. Again, he stands out because usually characters of this type were an alien invader, usually. And even then, maybe the closest thing to like a singular alien invader who was kind of a singular villain presence is the controller in Monster Zero. But even then, he doesn't have quite the same presence that Doctor Who does.
He has the threat, but he lacks kind of the charisma. Doctor Who has the charisma.
Oh yeah, for sure. And see, that's the thing about the spotlight being on him is that it requires an actor or even a voice actor, as we see with Paul, somebody who has that charisma to make them just a really diabolical villain. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure Nick's going to elaborate on that, but by far the most memorable part of this movie that delivers entirely, I would say, is Doctor Who. So yeah. Pro number 3 would be the special effects, for the most part. I think this was maybe one of the last movies that E.G. Subarai was actually the main effects technician for, because around this time, particularly with Sea Monster the previous year, he started supervising the work of other people in his department. In that case, it was Sadamasa Arikawa. And he ended up doing, Son of Godzilla and Destroy All Monsters and I believe Space Amoeba too. But anyway, I think this
I
is
think
one
he
of
did.
What was that?
I think he did, yeah.
Yeah. Well, because Teruyushi Nakano, he did Latitude Zero, I do believe. That was one of his earliest effects work, but still Subarai was supervising these things, but I think this was one of the last where he was actually the main guy doing it. And it puts, he pulls it off like he usually did. The miniatures are all great. Like the vehicles and like in the miniatures for the cityscapes and whatnot, they're all they feel alive most of the time, like they should, or you hope they would in these movies. There's a good sense of, that'll be my 5th pro. There's a good sense of sci-fi to this movie. Like in terms of, I like the little vehicle that Nelson has that comes out of the sub that they explore in. Or, Mechanic Kong himself, at least in concept, that's a really fascinating sci-fi prospect. And, he's not really a weapon. He's supposed to be a tool, pretty much.
As Trev stated before we started, Mechanic Kong is just a glorified bulldozer.
Yes, and I'll bring that up for my cons again. But yeah, I think the sci-fi concepts really Toho, whenever they finished out their '60s output, it was pretty much the pinnacle of this very pulpy sense of sci-fi. You had this movie, you had Destroy All Monsters, which is very space heavy. Latitude Zero kind of has some overlap with this in terms of like mad scientists and their secret bases and whatnot. It's just you get this sense from the second half of the '60s.
Oh, there was War in Space, too, that Jun Fukuda did. I don't know what year that came out. I think it was the late '60s.
No, I think it's '77, because it's definitely cashing in on Star Wars a little bit.
Oh, '77. Okay. Yep, you're right.
Yeah, but anyway, but you see what I'm talking about, right? Is that the late '60s, in comparison to how the show output from the early '60s was, except for maybe Atragon and Gorath, there's just a large scale sense of sci-fi that they unfortunately weren't able to match for the '70s output, even though they kind of wanted to in some instances. But yeah, I like the overall sci-fi concepts in here. And those are the main 5 things I think of, because I mentioned the main cast member that I think stands out from everybody else. Oh, wait, okay, here's pro number 6. I do like the other kaiju in this movie. You know, Gorosaurus is in there. This is his debut. Even the sea serpent, even though its effects aren't entirely great, that's a nice little addition there. Mechanicon, again, he's partially the sci-fi concept too, but he's also technically a kaiju of sorts. But as I'll elaborate on here in a little bit, he does factor into the cons. So yeah, those are my 6 pros.
All right. I have 10 fucking pros for King Kong Escapes. So strap yourselves in, people. Pro number 1 is Rhodes Reeson. Now, his brother Rex Reeson was the far more successful of the two, but Rhodes did have a decent career as well. Though, granted, I've only seen him in this, but he definitely has some talent. Me and Trev were also talking about this before we started. Rhodes Reeson pretty much is like a diet James Bond, specifically a diet Sean Connery. And that definitely, I don't know if that influenced his performance, but on this most recent viewing, he came off as acting very Bond-ish because he's got, again, to quote Adam, kind of like with Cesar Romero in Latitude Zero, he's got all the pussy in this movie.
Oh, here, let me say, I guess that factors in the concept thing. I do like how James Bondian this movie feels.
Yeah, this movie feels very much like a James Bond. I don't know if they were like being influenced by the James Bond series, because again, this was 1967, so the James Bond series was still very much in its infancy. But the overall tone of this movie, it's very much like a classic James Bond movie.
Well, in particular, 1967 was the year that You Only Live Twice came out, and Mai Hama, who is Madam X in this movie, she was actually one of the Bond girls in that movie.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Same thing with Akiko Wakabayasha, you know, from Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster or Dogra. She was also the more prominent Bond girl in You Only Live Twice. So there you go. Oh, and they're also, sorry, more trivia. They're also both in King Kong versus Godzilla as friends. There we go, guys. It's a small world after all. But anyways, Rhodes Reeson as Diet Sean Connery.
Yeah, Diet Sean Connery. He doesn't have the who is Sean Connery? Was he British or Scottish?
Oh, Scottish. He's like probably the most famous Scottish celebrity there was.
Aside from Gordon Ramsay.
True.
He doesn't have the Scottish accent, but I kind of feel like he has the same kind of sort of deep, gravelly tone to his voice that is very manly, but it's also very alluring. So
Got some that tell us.
No.
I'm just kidding.
No, he's a good lead. He definitely looks like the everyday badass type character, and he also has a slight sense of humor to him as well. Like, why do you think Kong will go after Susan? Well, Kong is a male, and well, Susan is Susan.
So, gentlemen.
And also in the last act, he's like, "Why should I take orders from you?" Oh, well, I'm not in uniform.
Yeah, exactly. That was funny. He's a good foil to Doctor Who. If Doctor Who is this slimy, you know, kind of character, then Carl Nelson needs to be the exact opposite. So
yeah,
there you go.
My favorite line that Carl has towards Doctor Who: "I see you built a robot Kong, yet you still kidnap the real Kong. You'd steal Niagara Falls for a drink of water." Love it. And yeah, like what Trev says, he's perfect foil. Like whatever something whatever something that Doctor Who has to say, Rhodes will always have something snarky to counter it. And it's fun to watch. And I kind of wish there was a bit more interaction between Who and Carl. But what we have is really good. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I like Rhodes Reeson. He's a good lead. He's fun to watch. His interactions with all the characters are really good. And they also have really good chemistry. Like, even though specifically, okay, I'm just gonna say it, I think Akira Takarada is the weakest main character in this movie.
He's literally the third wheel.
Yeah, but I'll talk about that when I get to my cons. But still, all the three main characters' chemistry is pretty good, in my opinion. You definitely tell that these characters have spent a lot of time together. It's not quite as good as Fuge and Glenn from Invasion of the Astro Monster, but it's close. It helps that Rhodes Reeson is a good actor.
True.
Pro number 2 is Kong himself. Love him. Despite the issues with the suit, which I'll get to when I get to my cons, I think Kong's character is very, very strong. Kong, of course, being played by Haruo Nakajima, which I'd like to think that this was one of his more favorite of his roles because King Kong was such a big influence on Godzilla, and he also studied Kong to play Godzilla, and now he has the opportunity to play Kong. I like to think he had a lot of fun with this one, but Nakajima's body language that he conveys with Kong is very, very, very solid. And I actually think that the face conveys a lot of that emotion too, even though at times it is kind of stiff. Kong's character comes out very, very well in his face and his body language. And also still, Kong is a total badass powerhouse juggernaut in this movie too, but he's not like a monstrous powerhouse. He's almost like a superhero powerhouse, which is really cool. Like as soon as he sees I can't speak today. As soon as he sees Gorosaurus, the first thing he does, put Anne in safety and start fighting. Sees that sea serpent, picks up a rock, tosses it.
Yeah.
Kong doesn't throw a lot of rocks in this movie, which is a little disappointing. That's one thing I loved about Kong in King Kong versus Godzilla is that he uses rocks a lot. And as soon as he sees Mechanic Kong, sets down Anne and charges into battle. It's cool. So he's very much so a heroic type monster in this movie, and he's really fun to watch. Also, I should have said this before in my King Kong versus Godzilla review, but I love the roars and growls for Kong in the Toho films. Love them to death.
Oh yeah, it's either this or, even though it's a generic monster roar, it's either this or the 76 roar that I think of whenever somebody says King Kong.
Now, the main roar, like the main loud roar that they have for Kong, like the one he emits after he defeats Gorosaurus, I actually think that does sound very, very gorilla-esque. Have you ever heard a gorilla roar? I think it does sound very similar to an actual gorilla roar. So now, I see that now, and I do appreciate Toho for using that roar. But also, like the more King Caesar-esque growls that they use for Kong, well, they use the Kong growls for King Caesar, but I saw King Caesar first before I saw Toho's Kong, so I always more associate those with King Caesar, but they work excellently for Kong. Yeah, Kong is awesome in this movie. He's so fun to watch. And honestly, if I was to rank them, oh God, because 05 is pretty awesome too. I don't know. I think it's going to be tied with 05 as the King Kong Escapes Kong is tied with King Kong 05 as my second version of Kong.
Not bad.
Pro number 3 is all the references. There's a lot of references to the original 1933 movie throughout this film. Of course, as discussed before, Eiji Tsuburaya was a huge fan of the original King Kong. Actually, all 4 of the co-creators of Godzilla were big fans of King Kong. But more specifically, Eiji Tsuburaya. And of course, this being a King Kong movie, there's going to be a lot of references to the original film. They get most of them out of the way, as Trevor said beforehand. They get a lot of them out of the way on Mondo Island, with Kong meeting Anne, picking her up and putting her in a tree and fighting a giant dinosaur and then fighting a snake. But then, of course, there's another one where he's on a rampage in the city and he climbs a tower. There's a lot of references to the original film. They don't feel like ripoffs. They just feel like loving homages to the original movie. And they still put their own spin on it. Partially because, A, they're guys in 2 suits in a miniature set. It's in color. And also, I just think it's better. And to be 100% honest, I think Kong's fight with Gorosaurus is debatably my favorite scene in the whole movie. Not to say that the rest of the movie is bad after that, of course, but that's just where I feel like I have the most fun with King Kong Escapes is Kong's fight with Gorosaurus. And I just as an added plus, I like the rest of the monsters. Not talking about Mechanicon quite yet, but the sea serpent. Yeah, the effects aren't the best on the sea serpent, but still, it's a nice addition. Though it leads to a moment of bad effects with the Kong suit, but we'll talk about that when we get to the cons. But Gorosaurus, I love Gorosaurus in this movie. Yeah, made just to pretty much be a new version of the T-Rex from Kong 33, but I like Gorosaurus than the original T-Rex more. So there's that. I love Gorosaurus's design. Love his roar. Love his color scheme. Yeah, he's a very simple monster, but I still feel like he's still a badass one, too. He's a good foil for King Kong, too. Pro number 4 is Mechanicon himself. I have one major issue with Mechanicon, but aside from that, I love Mechanicon. Love his design. Love his power set. It's kind of limited, but I still think it's cool. Love his roar. Yeah, he's a glorified bulldozer, but he's a badass looking glorified bulldozer. And he does very much so embody the fact that, yeah, that's Robot King Kong. There's no doubt about it.
Yep.
Not much to say about him. I just love Mechanicon. And God fucking damn it, I would have loved to see Godzilla versus Mechanicon. Let's see. Pro number 5 is the fun monster battles. There's technically 3 in this movie. There's Kong versus Gorosaurus, Kong versus the Sea Serpent, and Kong versus Mechanicon. 2.5 of these 3 fights are fun. My favorite, of course, being Kong versus Gorosaurus. The first half of Kong versus Mechanicon is awesome. And the fight with the Sea Serpent's just kind of okay. It's not that great, but it's ambitious, and I'll give it that for what it is. And also, Kong's rampage through the city and Mechanicong's rampage through the city is cool. Overall, and Kong's rampage at Doctor Who's base is also fun to watch too. So this movie's got quite a bit of monster action, and Kong himself has plenty of screen time throughout the film. Plenty. So you never feel like you don't get your money's worth when it comes to Kong. He's on screen a lot in this movie. Pro number 6 is Madam X. Not much to say about her, but she definitely does come off as being a bit of a femme fatale. But I like that the actress does convey that over the course of the movie, she comes to realize the error of her ways and tries to help the protagonist throughout the film, and she tries to kill Doctor Who as well. She fails in a very cringy way, but she tries, and that's what I appreciate.
Hey, well, I will say I'll probably add her to the list too. I just didn't think of her right away. But yeah, she had a good arc in this, and I think she's easy on the eyes. So there's that.
Pro number 7 is the music score by Akira Ifukube. Not much to say, and admittedly, there are a few moments where the music gets a little repetitive, but like the music that plays when Kong like beats his chest, of course, after defeating Gorosaurus, that's really cool. And overall, the music throughout the rest of the movie, a lot of it would be reused for Godzilla. I think it's better in Godzilla, but here the music is awesome, of course. It's brash and uplifting when the movie's being more action packed, and it's also when Kong and Susan are having a tender moment. The music is sweet, and it accentuates that tender moment. Just goes to show.
Go ahead.
Just goes to show, Akira Ifukube was a genius and a master of his craft.
I recognize a lot of the cues in this movie pop up again in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, although slightly altered.
Yeah, slightly altered, but yeah, you are right. Pro number 8 is Doctor Who, played by Hideo Yamamoto. God fucking damn. He is so fun to watch. Admittedly, a big part of it is Paul Frees's performance as Doctor Who. Because I feel like if I was to watch the Japanese cut, it just wouldn't be as strong. Now, yeah, which is it, Hideo or Eze Yamamoto?
We'll go with Hideo, because that seems to be the more listed name.
Hideo Yamamoto does have a good villain voice, but as Dr. Shiragami, not so much for Doctor Who, in my opinion. I definitely just hear Paul Frees's voice coming out of his mouth whenever I think of Doctor Who. And I think a lot of people would agree. Every line, kind of like with Blackhand Kelly from Tremors 4, every line out of Doctor Who's mouth in this movie is just gold. Well, don't worry about it. I can outsmart the UN anytime and any day.
Yes, Kong is mine now. Pow!
The real Kong seems quicker. My Kong won't tire. Love it. Everything out of his mouth is just gold. It also helps that he is dressed like such a fucking over-the-top 60s villain. Pure black, fucking 70s Japanese fro going on there with it being slicked back and streaked with black, wearing a fucking cape and gloves and a fucking fez, and his fucking face with his bad teeth and his slanty ass eyebrows, and the way that he like really over exaggeratingly accentuates his facial expressions and his mouth when he talks. It's just it's so over the top in 60s. It's hilarious and it's awesome. Doctor Who is such a fucking good villain. Do I think he's the greatest villain of all time? No, Adam, never. That's Ultraman Belial. But fuck me if fucking Doctor Who is not a fun villain to watch. Love it. Pro number 9 is the production values for this movie. Not talking about the effects, but overall the production value for this movie. You can tell that this had a bit of a bigger budget because of it being a co-production between a Japanese and American studio. Because this movie was shot in Panavision, the quality is much more crisp and clean. The colors are a lot brighter. The sets are also very well detailed, very sci-fi, but still also somewhat grounded, and also still feeling very much like classic Toho and also classic 60s cheese. Like if you're a big fan of the Adam West Batman show, you'll get a real kick out of this movie. More so Latitude Zero, but also this movie as well. So yeah, not much to say. All the sets look great. The island sets look great. The city sets look great. This may as well just lead me into Pro number 10. The special effects, 90% of the time, are very good. The suitimation is good. The fucking Mechanicong suit looks fantastic. That is a robot, as far as I'm concerned. That is a whole ass robot. Gorosaurus looks fantastic. The suit for him looks really, really good. It's very well detailed. I think Gorosaurus has one of the most detailed in terms of the scales and the folds of the skin, and how they tried to be much more anatomically correct to dinosaurs with, well, at least at the time, with Gorosaurus as possible. How Gorosaurus is a bit hunched over, and his arms aren't outstretched like this. They're more tucked into his body. And his posture is very dinosaurian. Gorosaurus' suit looks fantastic. And of course, his mouth opens and closes very, very well. The Kong suit has moments when it looks good, but we'll talk about that later. All the suits. Well, no. All the sets look great, and they look awesome when they're destroyed. Tokyo Tower is recreated very, very well, and it looks great. The North Pole base looks great. Overall, the effects, for the most part, are very, very, very good. And you can tell that they had money to play with for this film, and it shows very much so. Sorry.
That's all right.
With all these good things to say about this movie, there's a lot of bad stuff to say, but I'll let Trevor go first.
All right, so con number 1 for me is the inconsistency in Kong's suit. So you want to go ahead and talk about it together?
Okay.
Most of the time it's okay.
Sometimes it's decent, and other times there's bits of it that drive me nuts. Okay, so when Kong is fighting the sea serpent, that's when it looks really bad. Because go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, it was parts of one suit and then another, right?
So what they did, for some reason, like with the Godzilla suits, Toho didn't want to get their main suit wet. Which I actually can kind of understand that, because I imagine if the suits get wet because they're rubber, that probably speeds up the deterioration process. So they just use previous suits just as like cannon fodder, I guess. But the problem is that they used the 62 suit, which was not built for Haruo Nakajima to wear. It was built for Shoichi Hirose. And then they took the mask off the 67 suit and just plopped it onto the 67 suit. And it looks horrible. Kong looks like a fucking bobblehead. And also, when the 62 suit gets wet, this version at least, Kong looks like an orangutan on meth. He's got a giant bobblehead and a really skinny and lanky body. And it looks horrendous.
Yeah, so that's probably my main issue with the suit working here. There's a few close-ups. They're not actual suits, but they're like...
It's a puppet.
Puppets. Yeah, they're okay, but there's some parts which are... They don't help the derpiness, I'll just say that.
No, like the eyes, I could tell that they were... I don't know if they were trying to make Kong look a bit more cartoony, or if they're trying to make him look a bit more expressive by having big eyes, which I think that does help. But at the same time, it also makes Kong look a little bit ridiculous. And yeah, the eyes look a bit derpy at times. My main issue with the Kong suit is the hands. It's very obvious that Haruo Nakajima could not control Kong's hands. They were just like kind of like sleeves that had hand extensions on top of it. So his hands were in the sleeves, and the hands didn't move, and they're really tiny. Gorillas have gigantic hands and gigantic arms. So when I look at a giant gorilla, for him to have a big torso and large shoulders and smaller but big thighs, but then have tiny, skinny, scrawny, long arms, it looks very distractingly disproportionate, and it kind of takes me out of it. So yeah, really the worst part of this suit is the hands. They don't move. They just look like useless add-ons to a suit with sleeves, and that's it.
Yeah. Oh crap! I forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, the inconsistent suit work. Here we go. It would have been interesting if Nakajima had actually had his eyes visible, like with playing Gyra. Of course, then that would mean that this Kong would have preceded Rick Baker's Kong in being one that shows off his eyes to help with the expression. But, it's one of those what ifs, I guess you could say. All right, so con number 2, leading right on from that, is that some of the effects work, particularly blue screen.
Yeah, I was thinking that myself, too. Like, okay, I've seen way worse, but there are a few blue screen effects in this movie that really stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that you can tell they're trying to be ambitious, like with whenever Linda Miller is supposed to jump out of Kong's hand, or she's like falling and she gets caught. That's all very, very ambitious, at least in what they wanted to do, but it doesn't necessarily look that great.
Nah.
So in addition to the inconsistency of the Kong suit, that's probably my biggest gripe with the effects. Otherwise, everything else looks pretty damn good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so con number 3, and I'm probably maybe the only one who feels this way. I do feel the movie kind of comes to a halt for a little bit whenever the trio are basically kind of being interrogated by Doctor Who.
Yeah, that's one of my issues too. That's con number 2 for me, is the imbalanced pacing. I agree. The second half is when the movie just kind of comes to a halt. There is good banter between Carl and Doctor Who, but outside of that, it also really highlights Akira Takarada is not that good in this movie.
Well, it also doesn't. Well, it's not really a problem with Monster Zero because he's dubbed in that too, at least in the version I watched the most. But yeah, I think I already said he's like a third wheel in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't enough for me to list him as a specific con, but
Me
really,
neither.
it just seems to me. Huh?
Me neither. There's only one character that I list as a con.
Yeah, it just feels to me that really what the movie could have done, even though you would have to rework what the trio was doing at the time, what the movie should have done was right after Kong, they lose control over him. He doesn't respond to the earbuds anymore. That's when he should have escaped right away, and that's whenever he should have went to Tokyo, at least in my opinion. Because prior to that, it just kind of waffles between we're kind of trying to fill out some runtime. And that's what it kind of feels like. So along that note, con number 4, mainly the dubbing of Miss Linda Miller, which here's a trip read. So Linda Miller, we aren't the only ones who hated it. She also hated her dub voice, but she loved the Japanese voice, and I will agree that the Japanese voice actress does a much better job. She was extremely mad at Mr. Rankin, the producer, for not inviting her to dub her own lines when Rhodes Reason was actually able to redub his. And it turned out to work this way because Reason was part of the Screen Actors Guild, and Linda Miller was only a model and still residing in Japan at the time, so the transportation costs to New York would have been prohibitive. Also, while we're talking about the dubbing, Paul Frees did Doctor Who, but he also did all the other male voices in this movie, aside from, I do believe, Carl Nelson and Nomura, which is Akira Takarada's character. In an interview, Rhodes Reason said on the making of the film Paul Frees did almost all the male voices for the dub version. Frees apparently asked Reason why he was there and said, as a joke, "Why are you here? I could probably do a better version of you than you could." That seems a bit egotistical, but anyway. Yeah, so Linda Miller's dub is not great in this movie at all.
Yeah, that's con number 3 for myself is, oh God, the dub voice is just pain. Pain.
Kong! 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 I laughed out loud when I heard that.
It's just so cringy. It's badly recorded. It's really screechy. It's really whiny, bitchy, annoying, pain.
Pain incarnate.
Pain. Oh God! Like, what the fuck? Why couldn't you just let her use her real voice? Which we think we do hear her voice in one scene when she's like trying to not be separated from Jiro. That does sound a lot like her real voice, but her dub is just horrible. It's almost unwatchable.
I would agree. It definitely brings it down. Okay, and so I think my fifth and last con is the fact that Mechanic Kong, the fact that he's just a glorified bulldozer, well, that comes into effect in the fact that he's not really used much in this movie.
That's my next con. Con number 4 is the lack of Mechanic Kong. Yeah, he's in this movie for maybe 6 minutes. Give or take. And it fucking sucks because he's prominently featured on the DVD cover, prominently featured on all the posters, and he's barely in this movie. Barely. And it's really frustrating because I do like Mechanic Kong, but to have him in this movie so little, it's just lame. This will lead me into con number 5 for me, the second half of the final fight between Kong and Mecha Kong when they're climbing Tokyo Tower. It's boring because they focus more on Jiro rescuing Susan than the actual fight between Kong and Mecha Kong. What the fuck? Why?
Hey, Nick, I'm going to use the restroom, but you continue on.
You do that. So I don't like the second half of the final fight. It's really boring. It drags. It's not very interesting. And it just kind of ends, too. It doesn't have a very good stopping point. And like, as soon as Madam X destroys the controls, sploosh. Which, granted, that is a nice reference to the original King Kong with, the death of Kong falling off the tower. But still, the final fight just kind of ends. And you can't even really call it a victory for Kong, even though they make it up to be as one. Kong doesn't defeat Mechanic Kong, which is frustrating as fuck. Con number 6 is the villain's plot to this movie is very, very cliche. It doesn't really have anything special spun on it. It's just typical unearth a radioactive material, create a giant arsenal of weapons, and take over the world. Whoop-de-fucking-do. Granted, yeah, that just sounds like the plot to a kid's show, which this was supposed to be more of a kid-friendly movie. But still, the overall villain plot, it's really nothing special. It's very straightforward, simple, and it feels like a Saturday morning cartoon. Con number 7 is Takashi Kimura. Why did he write this movie? Why? This does not feel like Takashi Kimura's bag. This feels very much so out of left field and out of place for him to write. This being a kid's movie, this would have been such a better choice for Shinichi Sekizawa to write. But I don't fucking know why Ishiro Honda and Tomoyuki Tanaka decided to go with Takashi Kimura. He does not fit this stuff at all. And my final con with King Kong Escapes is Ishiro Honda himself.
Sadly.
I agree with Adam. Jun Fukuda should have directed this movie. Yes, Ishiro Honda knows how to... He's kind of like Japanese Quentin Tarantino in this way. He knows how to direct conversations, but unlike Quentin Tarantino, Ishiro Honda does not know how to direct action scenes. Jun Fukuda does. Look at the action scenes in Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. Same issue I have with Latitude Zero, that being the action scenes in Latitude Zero are very, very lacklusterly shot and lacklusterly executed. It just goes to show that Ishiro Honda was not good at directing action scenes, but Jun Fukuda was. That is one thing that would have helped the second act of King Kong Escapes, is if we had a few action scenes here and there with the human characters trying to escape. And there's one, and it's awkward as fuck and piss poorly shot to all living shit, and that's purely Ishiro Honda's fault. So I really, really, really dislike the decision to have Ishiro Honda direct this movie. And also his disinterest does kind of show at times, particularly in the action scenes, most notably in the second half of Kong versus Mechanicong. Yeah, Ishiro Honda really should not have directed this movie. I think of all the movies that Ishiro Honda has done, this is the ultimate example of a movie that he really should not have done.
Well, and to your point about Fukuda needing to direct this, Sea Monster is a great example of why he probably should have, because there's similar ground covered in that movie. And then later on he did Mechagodzilla. Like you said, he knows how to direct action scenes involving human characters. And also, I do believe you mentioned this while I was in the restroom about the plot, the villain plot for the movie. I will admit that even though Doctor Who is a compelling character and presence on his own, all of his schemes fail.
Yep.
It almost makes him look a little incompetent. Despite that charisma in the performance, the schemes are all incompetent. And then most frustratingly, at least to me anyway, right at the end of the movie, whenever they're on the ship and he wants them to get away, all of a sudden all his cronies become super dumb. And they're like, but I thought we were going to do this and that, whenever it's clear that they can't do that anymore. And it's like they're just holding it up on purpose. So, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of fake tension on their part. Any other cons you want to talk about?
No, just those 5 I mentioned, and I think you went into the other ones.
So, all that being said, let us wrap up our thoughts on King Kong Escapes. Trev?
It's a fun time. I think it's the beginning of the last round for Toho in terms of their 60s output. This was the beginning of the end, not to sound too ominous. But what started here kind of ended with Space Amoeba before a whole new era was ushered in for Showa. Or I don't even actually really call the last, the 70s output from Toho the Showa. I call it the Ezo era, because that was their special effects productions. Toho Ezo. But yeah, anyway, I think that this is the beginning of this last great stretch, or semi-great, in terms of like effects and whatnot. These last movies were like at the top of the game for Toho, but probably the plots began to waver a little bit. But yeah, if King Kong...
Then how the hell do you explain Godzilla's Revenge?
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of testing the waters of what they would eventually do in the 70s. But I digress. Yeah, Escapes on its own is a fun time in spite of its flaws. It's probably the best of the 2 Japanese King Kong movies. Even though I do like King Kong versus Godzilla, I think this stands out on its own better anyway. And yeah, really, it's, as we demonstrated with the plot synopsis, it's a straightforward, fun time.
So my final thoughts on King Kong Escapes, I don't think this is a bad movie at all. I think it's a fun, great, entertaining, well-made family/kids movie. If you want to show this to kids, it's an excellent time. An excellent way to kill an hour and a half. And now the word has been spoken.
Actually, I had seen it as a kid.
Oh, I would have loved this if I was a child when I saw this. This is my preferred of the two Japanese Kong movies. I have a lot more fun with this one than King Kong versus Godzilla. I think it's a much better movie. It's a much more well-made movie than King Kong versus Godzilla. It has a lot of problems, yes, but I definitely think that the good things outweigh the bad, which is why I will be giving this a solid 8 out of 10 for my final rating.
I think I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 as well.
It's a fun movie. It's a good movie, entertaining film. Sit down and just watch it and enjoy it. Because as soon as you start trying to find the flaws, you'll find a lot. But just sit back and watch it. It's a fun time. So, Trev, anything to plug?
Well, all I'll say is that if you've enjoyed any of my input on the videos I've done with Nick, go subscribe to my channel. Videos will be coming at some point. I just have to have the motivation and the proper time to do them. But yeah, if you like anything said, just go check out my channel. I need to update the link to the Fictosphere website, but also check out the Fictosphere. Yeah, just the same as always until I actually have something out there for you to watch. I don't want to make any promises I can't live up to, so there you go.
Look forward to future episodes of Super Kaiju Binge and join us tomorrow when we take on a scheme to destroy all monsters. Look forward to that. Post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And as always, go out and if you see a giant gorilla running towards you and a giant mechanical doppelganger running right behind it, means King Kong has escaped and you better run. And I will see you guys in the next video.